Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us here at the California Endowment. We have a live audience here in Los Angeles, and we are also online at Time Warner, a cable webcast. And this is hosted by the Days of Dialogue, and the conversation today is on the future of policing. It's going to start a series of conversations over the next year that are going to bring together faith leaders, community leaders, young activists, and police officers and officials to talk about issues that are important to our community. And we're hoping to start some kind of a dialogue that will let us discuss difficult issues in a sensitive, productive, and respectful way. The Days of Dialogue, it's a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization with the mission of being a catalyst in the community to raise awareness of these issues and help us kind of get on the same page and understand each other. The conversations are intended to be wide-ranging but very respectful, and we're going to welcome your comments and questions as we go through this. This is the 50th anniversary of the Watts Rebellion here in Los Angeles, and as a city and a nation, we're still dealing with some of the issues that it raised. It's also the one-year anniversary of the death of Michael Brown, and this conversation is coming on a morning that follows more unrest in Ferguson. So this is a timely conversation, and we have great guests here who can talk from many different perspectives about issues of police and community relations. I'm going to introduce them to you, and then they're going to talk a little about what they do and why they do it. First, we have Avis Ridley Thomas, who co-founded the Days of Dialogue, so she's responsible for us being here. It's been going on for 20 years. She recently retired after a career with the City Attorney's Office in Los Angeles. And she founded their dispute resolution program back in 1989. We have John Mack, who is a former Los Angeles Police Commissioner. That's the civilian body that oversees our police department. He's also the head of the Urban League. And he's helped shepherd the city through what was a really difficult time here when the LAPD was placed under a consent decree in the wake of the Rodney King riots. So he's got a long perspective and history on the evolution of police-community relations here. From the LAPD, we have Assistant Commander Regina Scott. She's in the San Fernando Valley Bureau. She heads that bureau. She's the first African-American woman to be named a commander in the LAPD. And she is on the streets now after being in the office for a while and really familiar with the issues that officers face. We have Rafe Sonnenschein, who's executive director of the Pat Brown Institute at Cal State Los Angeles. And Pat Brown was a governor here very, very long and presiding over the state at the time we had these troubles. He's the author of Politics in Black and White, Race and Power in Los Angeles. And the title alone tells you that that is a must-read for what's going on right now. We have Aurea Montes Rodriguez. She's a vice president of organizational growth at the Community Coalition, and that has been one of the major forces in South Los Angeles in securing justice, not just in police activities, but in education and other social issues. She is a passionate community organizer and has been advocating the building of relations between brown and black residents in South Los Angeles as that community undergoes a lot of transition. So I thank you all for joining us. We've got only an hour, so we're gonna keep things brief so that we can take questions. One note for people that are watching us on the webcast. Throughout the discussion, you're going to see survey questions pop up on your screen. And we would love it if you could respond to those right away. We'll get those, and we'll be dealing with some of those afterwards. And at the end of the hour, we will report the results of the surveys and the polls that we've taken, so we can leave here with a sense of how people in the audience are feeling. And if you're on social media here, feel free to send those questions along, too. We'll be taking them all. Now, with the housekeeping out of the way, let's get to the discussion. And the first question, and I just want everyone briefly to kind of talk about what in your background makes this such a central issue for you to be involved in today.
Well, for me, a Days of Dialogue gives the opportunity for people who feel unheard on important issues to be heard in a productive forum. Mediation has been my passion for years, having founded the City Attorney's Dispute Resolution Program. And people who have the opportunity to resolve disputes early on find that with those transformed relationships, that they don't have to escalate those disputes to get on a path to resolving whatever problems may exist.
And resolving problems, as we all know, requires a certain amount of respect on both sides. And I think, John Mack, you have kind of led the community, been a community voice for so long, but also kind of commanded that kind of respect. What brings you to policing as such a central issue?
Well, a whole series of incidents over the years, particularly during my years as president of the Los Angeles Urban League. Quite frankly, for a long period of time, there was a war in many ways between LAPD and the African American community. Incident after incident, the Eula Love shooting, this black woman who had just owed a small gas bill and was shot to death. 21 young African American men died as a result of the application of the chokehold. Then, of course, the Rodney King incident. It goes on and on. So that became a real burning, pressing issue for our community. And of course, we heard from so many individuals along the way regarding incidents that had occurred in their lives. So it just became a real passion and a top priority for me. And then, of course, later on, my involvement with the Police Commission.
And Commander Scott, you're in a difficult position, I think, here on the panel in general, because we can't help but note that so many of the incidents that lead to riots and rebellion are launched or sparked by a police encounter in the community. What do you see as your role in helping to resolve the issues and communicate, and convey the LAPD perspective, police officer perspective?
I think my role is in two forms, because first and foremost, before I became a police officer, I was a female African American in the community, raising an African American son, and you can see the difference in how I have to raise my son and maybe some of my counterparts. But I always say, if you want to make change, then you have to be part of the change you want to see. And so my whole purpose, and hopefully when I leave this earth, that I did make a difference, and that is to make sure that I am on the inside so that I can be part of policy procedures that are made. I have some influence on giving direction and instruction and training when it comes to use of force and how we accept and adjudicate complaints. So I'm just one person and one voice, but sometimes one person and one voice can make a difference.
Thank you. And Rafe, you are an expert in power and politics, and I think both of these play out in this issue of the state of policing. What makes this a central issue, if it is to you?
It's fundamental because this is about constitutional policing and how we get there. And when I read incidents or see incidents in the news, I always ask myself, what are the political authorities involved in that particular city? To what extent are these actions carefully examined in a constitutional and transparent way? And as John Mack knows, the City of LA has transformed itself from a system of unconstitutional policing to one of at least constitutional policing. It doesn't mean they always get it right. And it gets to the question of hope and change, which is to bring about change. It is to bring about a process where we can decide about an event more than lumping them all together. Some are good, some are bad. They're all disturbing. But I'm always thinking about what is the structure by which we can evaluate them fairly and judiciously.
Thank you. Now, Rhea, for you, you're the community voice here, kind of from the streets. What gets you engaged in policing? And I guess, and I'll ask you this, and I want to hear from others on this. We always tend to talk about in the media community policing. And when I talk to experts, they always talk about constitutional policing. So at some point, I want to talk about is there a difference in what those mean? But you're the community person here, so what do you think?
So, I grew up in South LA during the height of the crack cocaine epidemic. I was in middle school during the late 80s, and I had personal encounters because I had siblings and my friends with the police. On one particular incident, my brother and I were driving to get burgers at our local burger joint, and the police stopped us. Before asking any questions, they put a rifle to my brother's head, and the second officer came to the passenger side and said to me in derogatory language, "If you stay quiet, we'll get through this easier, and everything will be okay." Once they couldn't confirm gang affiliation of 2 college-bound kids, and they couldn't find any drugs or weapons in our car, they let us go. And this was pretty common practice. No one was exempt from the war that Mr. Mack was describing of the late 1980s. Then in '92, I was selected to go to a youth leadership institute in Washington, D.C. I had never left my community, and the institute happened 1 week after the 1992 civil unrest. So when my father drove me to the LAX, we had to clear all of the stops that the National Guard had, and that set the precedent for what the rest of my trip was going to be. When I got to D.C., I was assigned to a room with 2 white students who were afraid to room with me because I was from South Central. And every place where I had to introduce myself as an 11th grader, I had to explain what had happened in my community, why we were behaving like criminals and burning our community down. Never having have left my community, it gave me a sight of what people thought of my community, how criminalized we were. The year after, I went on to UCLA, and I knew that it took my entire community to get me there, and so I became determined to equip myself and come back to my community to work to deal with the deep-rooted issues that led to the police repression, the police abuse that we experienced. And I believe that we've made progress, but as we've seen in recent years, with all the killings of unarmed Black and Latino men, we still have a long ways to go. And so when I think about community policing, I think about really building relationships like with Commander Scott, who are a part of the community, officers and law enforcement who actually know the people who work there and who don't view all of us as criminals regardless of who we are.
And I guess your explanation raises another issue. And beyond community policing, constitutional policing, there's also kind of just civil policing. And there is, the idea of incivility. I mean, we saw that in the Sandra Bland case, and it just starts disrespectfully and rudely. And Commander Scott, is there a way to deal with that within the department, that mentality kind of?
And I'll say that, in the 80s, the late 80s when crack cocaine came in, I think well-intentioned are the police department. We saw numbers of homicide and crime that skyrocketed to a place that even the police department, was not familiar with. And and I say we because I am part of the police department, and I believe well-intentioned, they went in there thinking that they had to go and fix the problem. And I think through those years, we've learned a lesson. And just recently, our whole department, we did what we called a stand down, where we stood down every police division, and we brought every officer into a room, and the command staff, and that's myself and chiefs above, had a discussion with our officers about our expectations, about the level of use of force, making sure they understand the rules when it comes to detention. But what we really emphasize, and I think this is where we are going, and we understand that we're going into humanity in policing, that we do it with compassion and we learn to do it with respect. And I'm very encouraged with the in-car video because I think a lot of people are looking at in-car video and thinking it's the answer to all, and that it's going to be able to adjudicate the officers and let them know that they didn't do anything wrong, or the community to give them some power to show that they did something. But I look at it as a training, because you get some of these young officers that get involved in these things and they don't see themselves. And I think if we have the opportunity to take that video and use it as a training, that is the opportunity that they're going to see themselves when they think that they are policing with respect and dignity, and they actually get to see we adjudicated a case where a young man swore that he did not use profanity or didn't call people out of the name, and it happened to be audio recorded. And when he heard that feedback, in the midst of the chaos that was going on through his radio stop to get it to be resolved, you could see a resolve in his face. Because I will tell you, 99% of my officers that are on that force did not get up every day, put a badge on, and say, I'm going to shoot someone. the original why they wear this badge and why I came on, it was to make a difference, to change lives and to help community. And I think we just have to get back to that. And that training was really, let's get back to humanity, let's get back to the basics of policing, and let's get to know our community that we have sworn to protect and serve.
John Mack, how do you think that approach will take hold here? And what do you see, having watched this for so long, what do you see now as the major issue that we need to be looking at in terms of law enforcement?
Well, several, but just to pick up on the point about that Commander Scott was making a point, when I served on the police commission, particularly during the time when I was president, we were really focusing on the whole issue of racial profiling, which was one aspect of the consent decree that we were operating under. And first of all, at that point in time, LAPD did not have a series of good investigative approach, did not have a good set of protocols in terms of how do you go about really examining. Attitude was, we don't profile, just like the old we'll equal opportunity employer putting out at the sign and not doing anything about it. So after quite a bit of back and forth, we were able to, under the leadership of Captain Rick Webb, who really did an excellent job of fashioning protocols and a good set of investigative techniques. But in addition to that, the other important point that we really began to focus on, and I know Captain Webb did this, so much of it is about respect. Frequently, and there were issues frequently, more often than not, complaints coming from the members of the African American community in terms of how they were mistreated, frequently feeling they were discriminated against because of their race, and in some instances they were. But in many other instances, frankly, it was like just officers being curt, not really explaining to people why they stopped them. As you mentioned, showing a human side. So that became an important training priority for LAPD and for the Police Commission. I think it gave us a lot of progress. Also, to your other part of your question, I think that the worst time for an encounter to take place is when it's an adverse encounter. This gets to the point of community policing and or constitutional policing, if you will. Given the fact that so many of the officers live in a different part of the city, they may be assigned to South LA, but they live somewhere far away. And we have 10,000 police officers on LAPD. And they come from all kinds of backgrounds, and people bring their own life experiences and their stereotypes about other people, and frequently they are painted by the media and not always in a positive way. So I think to the extent that we can have positive encounters, I think, for example, one initiative in the Watts area, Jordan Downs, several housing projects where LAPD teamed up with the Housing Authority and put cameras in the housing projects. But in addition to the cameras, at one point, there may be more now, Regina, but 50 officers were assigned. And their number one assignment was not to go in there to look for ways to arrest people or to bust them, but to get to know the people, to establish relationships. And it seems to me that this is the kind of thing that we need to have happen throughout policing, throughout America, if we're going to really get to know, so that the police officers who unfortunately have a tough job, they see all kinds of terrible things happening, and I think there's a challenge that they should not become cynical. And if they're only exposed to negative kinds of behavior, there's a tendency to assume that all these folk are criminals, or all of these folk are bad people. So to the extent that we can create opportunities so that people have positive encounters, and on the other hand, so that community people don't feel that every police officer is a bad cop, because most of them are people who want to do the right thing. So it seems to me that these are some of the kinds of directions that need to take place. And of course, being helped by the video cameras and a lot of other things that just need to happen.
Well, and I've seen what you're talking about in play that goes both ways. I've been covering Jordan Downs over the last 30 years, in and out a lot. And it used to be when police came through, people would run. And now I have seen little kids run over to the police officers, and so it is, and I know it must also affect how the officers see that community too.
Right.
What do you think, Avis? I mean, John talked a lot about, and so did the other panelists, about relations between the community and police. Are there things, policing is not just now a problem in Watts or in other areas. I mean, I live in the San Fernando Valley, and I'm picking up a lot of distrust and hostility that wasn't there, say, 10 years ago. Are there large-scale things that you see as a community that should be happening to, foster more communication and more respect between police and residents?
Well, I really do appreciate the question, because one thing that I'd worked on for really about 20 years was having police community mediation available, so that if people thought that there had been a problem with incivility with an officer, that it gives the person the opportunity to address that, to sit down, to have a discussion about it, to find a way to resolve whatever problem they think occurred with the actual officer in place. So fortunately, that has been instituted through the city attorney's office. I wasn't there when it happened, but I am just delighted that finally that's starting to happen. And perhaps there will then begin to be opportunities for very early on people being able to and feeling empowered to address whatever concerns they have, knowing that they will be taken seriously and that will affect people's behavior going forward. Police officers, after all, are members of our community. And they're just the ones that are in place to enforce the law on our behalf. But we have an active part to play as well as community members. So part of that is raising your concerns and being able to address them in a constructive manner. So Days of Dialogue is just one approach that also helps advance that dialogue and that opportunity to address those concerns.
And if I may just weigh in quickly, Avis was the inspiration, and while I was still on the police commission, we did finally, in partnership with the city attorney's office, implement a mediation program that's now being implemented, which if there's an encounter between the officer and individual feels that he or she was mistreated or stopped for whatever reason, there are some exceptions, but the idea is that if the officer and the individual are willing to voluntarily sit down with a professional mediator through the city attorney's office and discuss this, and in a sense almost sort of walk in the other person's shoes. The officer can kind of, as they have a conversation, can see where the individual is coming from on the one hand. On the other hand, the individual can see where the officer is coming from. And if they can talk it out and arrive at an understanding, well, then if a complaint was filed, they can mutually agree the complaint will be dropped. Or if they cannot agree, well, then it will go on. I mean, it'll still go through the complaint process. But we thought that was another helpful way to try to improve the relationship, between members of the diverse communities here in Los Angeles and the police department.
And I have to say, I did not know about that, and as a member of the media, I feel guilty now that I think we have to do a better job of spreading the word about those kind of things so that people do know and they're encouraged to take advantage of them. Rafe, I know you have kind of a national look at a lot of what goes on when it comes to police and policing. What do you see? How do you see us in Los Angeles fitting into that? And what is in the future overall that will change the way communities and police departments relate?
It's a great question, because nationally, every city is different, every state is different, but we're all in the midst of the same thing. For about the last 50 years, but especially in the last 25 years, we've been demanding that police departments change their mission. And every bureaucracy changes only with tremendous resistance and with sometimes a lot of political force and then a lot of internal change that follows. Even though that change will ultimately be good for the bureaucracy and the daily lives of the officers will be better. John very kindly said there was a little bit of back and forth during the period. That is, of course, as he knows, a tremendous understatement. This was the defining battle of Los Angeles politics for 30 years. And it, in some ways, may have cost Tom Bradley the governorship that he took this on when the local police campaigned against him statewide. But Los Angeles is well down the road, but obviously not there. There's other cities where that change has not even actually begun, where simply the police are carrying out a previous mission, which is largely to keep trouble out of sight for people in more comfortable areas of the city by any means necessary, which was once the mission of the LAPD, but is not anymore. So I think we have to consider two things. One is that there always needs to be external political pressure on any bureaucracy to change from constituted authorities, the mayor and the council. Ferguson is quite a bit different today than it was when it first came to national attention because they held an election. And a lot of the people got kicked out and new people came in and they're bringing a different agenda. But I think this is what I would call, as John Kennedy said, a long twilight struggle. This is not something that will simply happen by changing attitudes. On the other hand, what gives me hope is the new officers coming in don't remember that old mission. They were not part of that old mission. And I think as their training goes on, I think you're going to have a fantastic new generation of police officers who only know this new expectation. And I think it's important that we stay in touch with them in a sympathetic way so that they're not put into an isolated position where they're talking, say, to colleagues who remember the old days and say, don't pay any attention to this new nonsense, because it's not nonsense. But I would say, keep in mind that at the end of the day, police departments are public agencies like other public agencies providing a service. And I have to say, in LA, these days I feel more like the police department is a department of the city, not a Praetorian Guard, as it saw itself in the days of Chief William Parker, maintaining kind of moral order against all the people who were causing trouble. That was their mission once upon a time. But just consider, you may be living in a city where that change has not even begun. But if you do chat with us, you'll find we're not done in LA with this, but we have fought this battle for decades and have made considerable progress, and I think everybody's life is better when you win those battles, as hard as they are.
Maria, I have, when I write about policing, I always get a lot of feedback from people, and it used to always be, well, why didn't they just do what the police said and nothing bad will happen? And it was always perceived as this is a question of black and brown communities. It's a question of poor communities, where it is certainly worse. Now we hear more, now that there are videos and there are cameras, we hear more about this, there being an awareness that this is a broader problem. How do you see, you're in a community that gets hit a lot harder for a lot of reasons. How do you get your experience to be recognized as, a valid experience and not just people complaining or making trouble? And, is there outreach that needs to be done to make kind of the greater world, assume responsibility for this?
I'm actually really excited by the movement of the new generation. And I'm particularly thinking about the leaders who are leading the Black Lives Matter work. Patrice Cullors, Alicia Garza, locally also Dr. Melina Abdullah, all seasoned organizers who are saying, the repression and the excessive police abuse that our communities have experienced is unacceptable. It really requires us to look at a deeper matter of race in our country and how the discussion that we were having after President Barack Obama got elected in 2008 about whether we were in a post-racial society, how that really is far from the truth, and it's these seasoned organizers who are creating the space for newer and younger activists to come into the space and to question issues around excessive police force, around the deportation, the mass deportation of families and the breakup of families for immigrants, around the criminalization of youth in schools. And it's youth that are beginning to engage in those questions that are really helping us, I think, to think about Black Lives Matter, not just if you're college educated, not just if you're middle class. Lives matter if you're a working poor person, if you are a homeless person, if you have a mental illness, or if you are formerly incarcerated. All lives matter. And I believe that, that's really what's making a difference, and that when we see these types of movements, it helps to create the openings for dialogues. It does begin to shift the perceptions of other communities who thinks it's only in South LA, it's only in Ferguson, Missouri, it's only in Baltimore, and they begin to say, well, maybe we haven't been looking at the issue of race. Maybe it is time for us to look at more systemic changes. Maybe it's time for us to look at policies that can help to build trust between law enforcement and community, to put in place accountability of law enforcement. And so for me, I'm just really encouraged by the work that we do as organizers, and the fact that it is a Black and brown or a people of color who we've started out as kids. We started getting involved as kids, no longer a kid, but really proud that there is agreement nationally that we're not in a post-racial society or America, and that we have a lot of work to change the way policing and law enforcement works with communities of color.
Yeah, I think we have now had to accept that there is a racial element to this. And research has shown that there is implicit bias, that police officers are no different from a lot of people, that life and the media and all has given them certain internal perceptions of people. What can studies show, for instance, that a police officer is quicker to shoot when a Black man has something that might be a weapon than when it's a white man, and these are done on computers, and these are well-meaning officers who would never express racial bias. Is there, in the future of policing, is there a role for increasing awareness among police officers of this, and helping them to kind of compensate for it with better training or sensitivity? Or how do we deal with something that's basically an internal kind of under the radar feeling?
We are fortunate in Days of Dialogue to have a partner doing exactly that research in partnership with police departments and other universities throughout the country, is the Center for Policing at UCLA. And they also have access, and it's available online, to the implicit bias survey. You can find it, you can Google it, and all of us have our biases. So it's fascinating to take that little quick index and to get some feedback online. I think it's through Harvard University that they are doing that research. So police officers, just like the rest of us, have biases that can be explored in their training, and I think that the Center for Policing Equity does assist with training. They partner with departments throughout the country. And just individuals can take the assessment just to get a little take on biases that they may not have believed that they had. And so I even found my result a very interesting one that I wouldn't have anticipated. Okay, thank you.
I might also add that, again, at LAPD, we have a very, very excellent training department, and we have a psychologist who works with the staff of the police academy, and as a matter of fact, we have brought in experts on this very subject, of unconscious biases, to incorporate that into the training. But I want to. There's another point that I think is not made enough in this whole arena. At the end of the day, we need to do a better job. We collectively, not just here in Los Angeles, but nationally, when we talk about law enforcement, on the front end of recruitment, make sure that we're recruiting people who are emotionally up to the job. They must be properly trained, and we see the disparity. For example, we talk about Ferguson. To me, that was a combination of racism, but also just incompetence. Some of you may be old enough to remember the old Barney Fife TV show, Run Around. You know, that's what I was reminded of when I saw the Ferguson police in action. So you have that extreme on the one hand, and on the other end of the spectrum, you have a Los Angeles. And not that we're a perfect institution, but the point I really want to make is that accountability, even when you have great policies in place, when you have well-meaning officers by and large, you got to remember, if you have a police force of 10,000 people, not everybody's going to drink the Kool-Aid. And when you have those instances where individuals violate policies, they need to be held accountable. And I think that's an area that, frankly, is not talked about enough. Yes, we need to train people, we need to recruit the right people and do all that stuff, but whenever an individual officer does something wrong, and that's where the police commission here, one of the important things that came out of the Christopher Commission report, the charter amendment that incorporated so many important changes, in addition to limitation on future police chiefs, but the strengthening of the role of the police commission was a very important one, so that if you got to have a combination of several things going. We ended up with the consent decree, which was important. We had the Christopher Commission, which was important in laying the groundwork, and we had a progressive police chief who got the ball rolling, and Bill Bratton, and we had a mayor, and Antonio Villaraigosa, who appointed and supported an independent police commission. You have to have all of those ingredients if you're going to really talk about having achieving the kind of reform and the kind of changes that we were able to achieve here and that some other departments were able to achieve. But people have to, at the end of the day, have to be held accountable, have to do all those wonderful things to try to make them be successful.
You raised an interesting point that doesn't come up a lot about recruitment, too. And I had a conversation with Chief Beck a few months ago about realizing that the recruiting tactics that the department used for so long were the pictures of the SWAT guys and the helicopters and all that, and it attracted a lot of, military veterans. And he said it almost makes you wonder if people aren't coming in kind of stoked for more excitement than you're going to get in day-to-day on the job, and that you also need to kind of look at the social worker types who might want to be police officers, because their skills are just as valuable, and that a mix of people is what you need. And I love the way, Commander, you talk about, being an African-American woman first and being a mother and having all these things that affect how you approach your job. What do you think could be done on the front end to kind of assure that we do better in the future?
Well, I agree. I mean, we sold the venture. That's what we sold, like the military. Be all you can be. So when we were recruiting, we were selling an adventure, and that was what got young women. It got me there, too. Of Christy Love. Oh, I'm dating myself a little bit. Ooh, I'm back now. But we did sell, and you will start to see that the change in the marketing of how we do market our police department, because we had the warrior versus guardian mentality. It was part of how we even trained a warrior, how officer safety was number one. And then we also talked about the guardian, and you will see a transition or how we transform from now being a warrior to being guardian. But as far as the recruitment piece, I think it really starts with growing them. It's like we promote our own internal from when we were a baby, when we first come in onto the police department, and then we develop ourselves. So what we have put together is a very robust cadet program, and part of that cadet program really does emphasize the community policing side, the piece of that humanity piece. What we're doing with our new recruits once they make the academy, we're talking about the humanity. But the other piece is we have a citizen academy. So those that don't know what the police department does, we have a community police academy that every division, no matter where you live, we put that in. That'll help get them in. But I do agree, we were marketing to sell an adventure, and that piece is changing. I will say this, I sat on a committee that does recruitment, because one of the things was how do we recruit more African American. And it's hard. It's difficult. And I don't know if we, the police department in itself, is part of that, because we stop so many African Americans and they get so many citations. And a lot of the things that we have done in the 80s really is a byproduct of probably why our police department is unable to recruit. But I do say this, regardless of what's going on within the department, we have a lot of minority that are out there that are applying. And our police department is changing to mirror and to reflect the community. I mean, at one point, we were like 80% Caucasian, and then within that 20% you mix with African and black. Right now our department is about 48% Hispanic. We're about 9% African American, and 35% Caucasian. So it is changing, and I believe what you said is when the younger officers come in and when the people from the community now is taking over our police department, I think I'm very happy to see where I think the future is going. And to speak a little bit about accountability, very proud of our department and the processes that we have. And I know we have civilian oversight, as John Mack talked about in the police commission, but we also have civilian oversight in our complaint system. When we do a board of rights, when an officer is being disciplined for serious misconduct, there is a civilian component that is on that board. And part of my challenge is to make sure that the community is part of that process, because you get to see and be a part of the penalty and hold the officers accountable. I think this year, right now, we've got 13 officers. There's about 13 officers that are being indicted or being held for criminal charges. And of those 13, the majority of those officers or officers that we identified, that we brought forward, that we took to the district attorney and said, hey, you need to do something. So I think if you asked me 20 years ago, would that have ever happened? I think the process and the accountability that we have put in place, it is working, and we are trying to be the best police department for the community.
So, Rafe, this is an audience question that I think should go to you. How does poverty impact police-community relations? And I say that because when we think about the blow-ups that we are having around the country, they're almost always in poor communities. What is it about that relationship that it makes this a tinderbox?
Well, I think it adds to the relationship that's bolstered by race and ethnicity, which, of course, it would be one thing if everyone was of the same socioeconomic class. Police officers are, in effect, middle class, fairly successful public officials, public employees. But when they deal with poverty, I think they're dealing with society's whole attitude toward poverty. And in general, we've tended in this society to elevate the word middle class. So even political candidates who want to help poor people have a middle-class agenda. They don't have a poverty agenda. And that's indicative of something, that there's a kind of a denigration of people who are poor. And I have to think that's society as much as it is police officers. And when you add that to questions of race, I think it really does push things in a very unfortunate direction, because then you're also judging what you think of as someone's lifestyle. In reality, poor people in this country are working enormous hours in most cases, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs, but are just not earning enough to not be poor people. And yet, very often they're characterized as not working, which is, of course, goes against all the evidence. That's one that I hold against all of us as a society. That's been part of our ethic. Can I throw one other thing in, Sandy? The younger officers need to know that constitutional policing is not just the opposite of unconstitutional policing. Unconstitutional policing used to say the officer is never wrong. Constitutional policing does not mean the officer is always wrong. And one of the things that I think needs to come across is that we have to have the courage when the officer is not wrong to say that the officer is not wrong, even if that generates considerable resistance from within the community. You can't go from one, in a sense, unconstitutional view to another. And I think if officers understand that constitutional policing is there to protect them when they're right, as well as to hold them accountable when they're wrong. But that's something I think we need to talk about more. And I have to say, it takes a lot of political courage in both cases. It's very difficult to declare an officer wrong, even today, but it's also very difficult to declare an officer right. But I think those are both, that's what constitutional means.
And I think it means educating the public on why they're right, because there is a strong presumption in communities that the police officer is always going to be found right, no matter what they did, which puts a bigger burden, I think, on the department and perhaps the police commission or whoever's adjudicating it to explain what made it right. And I think I think one of you said, I think you said about having people be in each other's shoes. And that's kind of it. These things all, and the media has a big role in this, I say, because we have to present how the other person would speak and see things. And there's been a lot of conversation about body cameras and how part of their value will be that we will see things from the officer's perspective, because this is what they saw when they did it, which just make us smarter about it. And on the poverty issue, I think you're right. There's been research that shows that most Americans, believe that people are poor because they didn't do something right. It's their fault. And there's not a lot, especially in a city like Los Angeles, where neighborhoods are so spread out. There's not a lot of contact between people in middle-class neighborhoods and people in poor neighborhoods. And so I'll have to go back to you. That's kind of really puts a burden on you to kind of, prove. You have to actually prove that you're worthy before you even prove that you didn't do anything, I think. How do kids, the young people that are coming up, did they talk a lot about where that burden and changing that perspective?
It makes me think of is just like my experience where I had never left my community. A lot of the work that we do with the young people in South LA is to really expose them to what the world is like. And so when they see that their schools are falling apart and they're blamed for just the deterioration in their schools, we take them to see schools in more affluent parts of the city where they can see what a just working class, middle class public school looks like, and talk about why do these differences exist, and why do our streets look the way that they do, with no sit-down restaurants or very few sit-down restaurants, no banks. We have them do a survey of what exists in their community, and then we take them to a more affluent part of the city for them to see what the city looks like. And once the youth begin to see those differences and they begin to ask the questions and stop blaming themselves for why the conditions are the way they are, or why they are poor, they begin to ask, oh, it's true, there are people in other parts of the city that never have to encounter us at all. Yeah. They can live their life, go about their day, take care of all their business, and never have to interact with us. And once a young person sees that, they become very empowered and are able to really begin to demand greater equity in public education. Our young people in South LA have led some of the most successful campaigns to reform public education in the LAUSD. And their parents are now the ones getting involved in Westmont and other parts of South LA to say, you know what, these deaths that are happening of African American, not criminals, of unarmed young African American or Latino men, we need to begin to speak up. We need to come and say something about it. And for me, it's that type of engagement that's going to begin to change, because we can't force people to come to South LA, but we can begin to broaden South LA and the understanding of what life is like outside of poverty, because you're right, most of these families are working 2 to 3 jobs, and their children are so resilient and so self-sufficient because they're having to hold the family together so that their families can have an opportunity to get out of poverty, but also stay in their community. So what we're finding, we actually participate in a longitudinal study that looked at youth who are engaged and active as leaders and organizing in high school. The majority of our youth are going on to a four-year college and university, and the most important outcome of that survey that was done by UCLA IDEA and USC was that the students, 80% of them are actually leaders on their college campuses and are staying civically engaged after college. And so for us, that's tremendously important, because that's what's going to ensure that we can continue to see positive reforms in all of our public systems, education, in the policing, in the law enforcement and policing system, and in all of the systems that manage poor people, really.
That's great. That's the most encouraging thing I think I've heard today. We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to, on that, to tag on to that, there's a question from the audience. When you talk, because you have data now, you have longitudinal studies, are there any studies that show, any research that shows whether the dispute resolution program is working or making an impact?
There are a lot of studies, fortunately, because dispute resolution has been, it was initiated by the Department of Justice many years ago, before I actually worked in the city attorney's office. They started community boards, and from that point, the Department of Justice stopped this funding, but then states took up funding opportunities. And so the California Dispute Resolution Programs Act was just one of the many programs throughout the states. There's pretty extensive research through universities among mediators. So there are opportunities to see the benefit. We're also involved in the Institute for Nonviolence in Los Angeles, which I now oversee, peer mediation. And so mediation in elementary and middle schools, we're teaching young students how to do that. And there's extensive research now demonstrating the positive impact in the school environment. So I'm so delighted that the City Attorney's Office is continuing with the mediation program after I left, and there were 2,000 community mediators trained at that time through the City Attorney's Dispute Resolution Program. So throughout our community, we have wonderful people who have volunteered their time to help people to resolve disputes in a lot of sectors. I mean, education and healthcare, certainly involving police officers, but in businesses and communities. So there is a great body of research continuing to evolve in that arena.
And then, and this is probably a good one to kind of wrap up with, is someone has asked how their community organization can get involved with Days of Dialogue. And to take it even further, though, how can community organizations get involved in helping to shape the future of policing? I mean, it would be wonderful, and it would be a great collaborative experience to have groups from all over. You know, you have the Venice neighborhood now is very worked up about policing, and every community may have different issues, but you know, any of you that want to talk about how we can have more community involvement and collaboration in shaping our police department into the force that we need and deserve.
Well,
you've been a community leader forever, so you.
Well, I think that it's important for people to get involved, not when there's an incident. All too often, that's the tendency. People get all worked up when you have a shooting that's controversial or use of force. We have, certainly within the Los Angeles Police Department, the chief has a series of forums: African American Forum, Latino Forum, gay and lesbian, Muslim, I mean, across the board. Inviting people to participate, where they meet on a periodic basis with command staff, senior command staff, and not just as cheerleaders for the department. That's the important thing, and that's the important change. Once upon a time, that's what those groups meant. But they are now welcome to come and provide constructive criticism, things that are happening in the community, things that the department needs to be doing a better job around. So I would just, I think it's very important for community activists and community organizations and their leaders and residents to become proactive. Certainly, I can't speak for law enforcement throughout America. There may be some police departments that would not welcome this, but they should. But certainly, I know that kind of participation is welcomed here in Los Angeles.
And Days of Dialogue, we have a website, daysofdialogue.org, futureofpolicing.org, also lists all of the dialogues going on, especially over this next year. We've committed to the LAPD request that we at least have a year's worth of opportunities to get people out and discussing the issues that are important to them in dialogue. So tomorrow is the 11th of August, the 50th anniversary of the Watts Rebellion, and there will be about 12 different sessions throughout Los Angeles on the 11th of August. We have sessions scheduled so far through about October right now, with specific information there on our website. And so people can be involved by simply contacting us at Days of Dialogue. We have a Facebook page at Days of Dialogue LA. We are tweeting. We encourage a lot of interaction with Days of Dialogue. We're located right here in this building, and we accept all kinds of assistance from members of the public and involvement, because that's what our mission is about here.
People should just remember that the worst time to meet, to have your first meeting with a police officer or a police leader is when there's an incident.
Yes.
You ought to know each other, form a relationship, so that, frankly, when the going gets rough, you already have an established relationship and communication line and can work through the issues and problems much better.
Commissioner Mack said it all, but first I just want to thank you. The Days of Dialogue, our police department encouraged it. We didn't know how we could go about putting together something like that, and you welcomed that, and we jumped all over that, and so we're very pleased to have that. And we encourage, a lot of times we have these meetings, and we get the people who support the police, and that's great, because we want to hear how great we are. That's wonderful. But we are looking for those that don't like us. And I was down in, when I was at South Bureau, and I met with Sweet Alice, and I remember Chief Bratton was there, and Chief Bratton asked Sweet Alice, he said, hey, what can we do for the community? And she looked up and she said, I just want you to see us, to see us. And so now I'm going to turn that around, and I'm going to say to the community, the police department, your police department, want you to see us, to know us. Because as you know us, I'm not going to say you're going to love us. We're like family. You're not going to love all your family members. But you will come to understand. And we have a variety of places where you can learn about what police officers do. We have youth programs. And if you have children out there that you don't know what to do with them, we will take them. Our goal is to build our police cadet program, and it doesn't mean they don't have to be police officers to be cadets. We teach leadership. We teach community service. We teach them how to speak. We teach them things, and our cadets go to college. Our cadets grow out to be lawyers and doctors, and it's a beautiful program, and we've teamed up with USC, so they get to go to the USC campus, and they graduate in USC, so they get that environment, so that they could see that there is hope. And if you talk to some of these young people that are there, I've seen officers just break down and cry when they run and they did their speech or they're able to accomplish something, just to see the transformation of being told that they would probably never grow up to be anything, to the police officers hugging them and telling them that they love them, and anything that they build that relationship with us. We also have a community police advisory board, and that is an advisory board for every police division. Every police station has an advisory board, and that is made of the community in that division, and it helps advise the captain as to what's going on in their division. And part of that is to identify community projects and that we police based on what you say you need, not policing based like we did in the 80s, what we think you need. The other piece we have is we do have that Citizen Police Academy. It's beautiful. You get to go in and you go through a little bit of mini of what the police do. Now, no, you don't get a gun and you don't shoot, but you do get an opportunity to go through our simulator. And we did that in a couple of our community where we brought the simulator out so you could be in their shoes, as you said, and get to do the shoot and don't shoot. And I'm telling you, you guys are worse than my cops. So the community goes out there and they'll shoot everything because of the flight and the fear. And this is just a simulator, but they get an opportunity to see you have a split second. That's pretty much it. In 2 seconds, which seems like an hour when you're involved in a shooting, it's 2 seconds to make a decision. And then when you do, just to kind of deal with the internal process that you go through when you take or have to take a human life. It is not an easy task that you have to deal with, and that's why we have psychologists that come out. That is why we remove the officers from the field so that they can internalize as to what they go through. We do have the forums that gets us to the community, and we do have senior lead officers. And for those that are out there, those are our community officers. So if there's something going on in your community and you want to know about the police department, if you don't know your senior lead officer, you are missing a huge opportunity. You're missing your power that you have within the police department. And we also ask you to invite us to your community events. All you have to do is ask. You give us an ask, and we will be there. And we will be there to build that relationship.
So for me, at Community Coalition, we're doing a summer of activism. We had a People Power Assembly last Thursday, and we had 80 residents there. So any organization that wants to partner with us, this is a concrete way to get involved with community residents and community organizations. I think one of the things that I want us to think about is that in commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the 1965 Watts Rebellion, the 1992 civil unrest, this work, as Mr. John Mack said, is really work that's happening over a long term, right? And so it's important for everybody to get engaged and not to just get engaged if a flashpoint happens. It is a problem that Black and Latino unarmed men continue to lose their lives. Not what we're seeing that's recorded nationally on television and social media is not criminals who have lost their lives. It's everyday individuals. And so for us, the discussions that we're having in the People Power Assemblies are to do two things: to propose what changes need to happen that really get at the issue of race, but also to allow the community to heal, because the community needs a space to really talk about the trauma that we've experienced for decades that we need to work to recover from, right? Because it's not the trauma of an incident, it's trauma, daily trauma of the relationship that our communities have had with law enforcement. And so that's something that I'd like to encourage everyone to get involved in, whether it's in LA or other parts of the country.
All right, well, they're about to cut our microphones off, I think. So I want to thank all of the panelists for coming. Thanks Days of Dialogue and Time Warner Cable for sponsoring this. And we are going to be covering this in the Los Angeles Times, my column, Sandy Banks. We're going to be writing about police community issues going forward. And if I have 30 seconds more, I can just say we got some interesting responses to the survey questions from those of you who are watching the webcast. 56% of the people that responded said that police community relations would be improved if community members did not have so many guns. And we've taken some steps toward that in Los Angeles now, but 56% said that it would be great to have fewer guns. 8% said no, it's just all the police fault, and then there was a mix on the measurement. When comparing treatment of community members by law enforcement, do you believe that people of color are consistently treated less fairly than are Caucasians, white people? And I will say this is a question that has been shifting, an answer that's been shifting a lot over the last, particularly the last year. It's incredible the change. Here we have about 2/3 combined saying yes and frequently. About 31.8% said yes, that's true, and another 31.8% said it happens very frequently. And the number of people that said, no, everything is just fair and even, is now, it was 8.7% among our listeners. And granted, these are people who are interested in the subject, but I can tell you that's a sea change in what we would have seen before we had videos and before we had this string of deaths. And the last question was, would you participate in facilitated dialogue sessions between community members and law enforcement in your community? And 64% said yes, they certainly would. So I hope that we can make more efforts to get things like this going all over, and every community has its own issues. But it's really great to hear from people who are on the ground and in the ivory towers and in the trenches doing the work. So thank you all for coming and listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you.